Okay, so here we are on the 4th of February 2024, and today is the transition day of the sun going from the days of Rowan into the days of Alder, which is the actual cross-quarter point of astrological in bulk. This is the halfway point between winter solstice and spring equinox, so that falls on today, though most people celebrate St. Bridget's Day on the 1st of February and so on, but the actual astrological moment is today. So I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint presentation. There's a lot to say in this talk, and new information that I'm learning, and it's opening up a whole Pandora's box of insights for me. So just quickly, this is our 3rd year going around the Grove. If you want basic lore on the Alder tree, you want to look at the YouTube channel for the Owen Grove and look for the Alder tree 2022. And if you want herbalism and medicine of the Alder tree, you want Alder tree 2023. So this year, 2024, we're looking at gods and goddesses around the Grove. Now, predominantly previous research with the Alder tree has shed light on the Welsh story of Bran and Branwen, and Branwen's son, who is called Alder tree, and the shield of Bran is recognized by its older branches. So the family of Bran and Branwen is intimately connected with the Alder tree. And literally just in the last couple of days, I have found star lore that makes even more connections with the family of Bran and Branwen and their father, Manwyn ap Lir. They're the children of Llŷr. Anyway, I'll explain that when we get to it. So today, our wheel, we're transitioning in the bottom left-hand corner, the very moment of Imbolc. Oops, what happened there? There we go. So in the left-hand corner, you can see the transition between Rowan and Alder corresponds with Aquarius. Now, Imbolc. Alder takes us through Aquarius into the days of Pisces. So it's 15 degrees of Aquarius and 3 degrees of Pisces, the fish. Now, each of those zodiacal signs have classical deities that correspond with them. Aquarius is the queen of the gods. In Greek, that's Hera. In Roman, that's Juno. And it corresponds with lots of Celtic goddess queens. We looked at some of that in the last session with the Rowan tree. And we're still going to be looking at queen-related things to do with the second half of Aquarius. But also, Alder takes us into Pisces. And Pisces in the classical world is governed by Poseidon and Neptune. And in a Celtic perspective, that's Manannán mac Lir, the god of the sea. So we'll look at that at the end of this talk, because that's just the last 3 degrees. When we go into the days of Willow, it's all Pisces. So that will be dominated by Manannán mac Lir and the children of Lir and stories like that. So here's a nice photo of this very moment. On the left is a Rowan stave, and on the right is an Alder stave. And that's this time of year. This was taken some years ago in Glastonbury Abbey. But the portal, if you like, between the days of Rowan and the days of Alder is now. That's the actual gateway, the midpoint between winter solstice and summer solstice. Now, also, it's cut off a bit for me on this screen, but at the top it would say alder tree, and it's directly opposite broom. So alder and broom have a polarity relationship. So the story of Bran and Branwen also includes information about the cauldron of renewal and Bran having to cross the sea to Ireland. The story unfolds and so on. But equally, that opposite time of year is Ceridwen's cauldron and the raven. There is a constellation of a raven called Corvus, the crow. And so the cauldron and the raven are directly opposite the alder tree, where Bran means raven, and his story is about the treasure, the cauldron of renewal. So there's some sort of polarity, star lore wrapped up in the story of Bran and Branwen. Which brings me to one aspect of today's topic, and it's this. The word is asterism or asterisms. Now, having spent a long time looking at star lore and Celtic mythology, I think before the Celtic people were conquered by Rome, they saw the night sky as asterisms. And then after they became Romanized, you get hybrid culture and zodiacal lore starts becoming hybridized into Celtic stories. So as with the cauldron and the crow being opposite the days of Alder, that's kind of zodiacal, and it's to do with the sun's ecliptic and the circle the sun makes throughout the year. But there's also another way of looking at the night sky, which does not at all pay attention to the cycle of the sun traveling around the ecliptic. It looks at the night sky as shapes that you can make in the fire flames, shapes you can make in the clouds, you know, that there just are all those stars, and different cultures have told different stories about the patterns that star groups make. So simplistically, you can call that asterisms, which just means star patterns. So you can, you know, if you follow the year cycle, that's the sun going around the ecliptic, visiting zodiac signs or 20 trees or 36 decans. But now we're going to look at some star patterns, because I'm thinking, and I'll give some examples, that's how the Celts looked at the night sky. They evaluated star patterns rather than the sun's ecliptic. So here's one we're fairly familiar with if you've read a copy or two of the journal. The pale blue streak running up is the Milky Way. In the bottom part is a hexagon pattern made of 6 bright stars, and it's called the winter hexagon. But inside that hexagon, there's about 6 constellations, but they tell a story, and the story they tell is of the winter hunter, which we now call Orion the hunter, and his hound. So you've got the hunter and the hound hunting across the night sky in the winter months. So that's like the winter hexagon, the winter stars, tells this story about the winter hunter. At the top of the picture, there's a triangle made of 3 bright stars from 3 constellations which were seen as birds. So this summer triangle, or the 3 birds of the summer, is the summer stars, and that gets referred to a lot in Welsh bardic lore, and they also equate with the 3 birds of Rhiannon, known in Welsh as the Adar Rhiannon, the 3 birds of Rhiannon, and they're important. But simplistically then, as a example of looking at asterisms rather than the sun's ecliptic, between the summer triangle at the top and the winter hexagon at the bottom, on the Milky Way, there's a W shape, and that's the goddess of the heavens, the queen of the heavens. And sometimes the W shape represents a heavenly throne that she sits upon as queen of the heavens, but also in some Celtic lore, it's the breasts of the mother goddess as well. So when you think of things like in Ireland, there's the paps of Anu, there's the breasts of the mother goddess Danu. That is a direct reference to this constellation, which is depicted in a few carvings emphasizing the breasts. And that's important to some more asterisms we're going to look at shortly. So here's a thing then, and I want to show how this is on the Gunderstrup cauldron. If the three birds are in the sky, then the hunter and the hound are below the horizon. You can't have them, you can't have the summer stars and the winter stars in the sky at the same time. Equally, if the hunter and hound are in the sky, then the three birds are below the horizon. And that's depicted clearly on the Gunderstrup cauldron. There's the two big birds on either side of her, and she's holding a little bird in her hand. Okay, so the big birds are Cygnus the swan and Aquila the eagle. Two of the big birds are the summer triangle, and the small bird is the constellation we now call Lyra the harp. But in many old ancient cultures, Lyra the harp was a small bird. So here's the thing then, if the three birds are in the sky, the hunter and hound are below the horizon. And if you look at her breasts, falling upside down is the hunter and the hound. So it's a perfect depiction from like the 1st century BC of star lore asterism. So it's not the sun's ecliptic, it's a pattern made by the stars. So one of the topics for this session was asterisms and understanding a different way of looking at the night sky. So this brings us to the asterism of now, of today, this transition between Rowan and Alder tree. Now, I'll give you some time to adjust to this because it's a very busy picture, but in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see Aquarius is written. And roughly in the middle of the lower part, you can see Pisces is written. So the Alder tree is going to take us through the second half of Aquarius into the first few degrees of Pisces. So that's where we are for the days of Alder. And if you look up if you go between Aquarius and Pisces and look up, you'll see Pegasus. So Pegasus is this heavenly horse. To represent it being heavenly, it was often drawn with wings. Now the next picture cuts away a lot of the busyness just so you can see Pegasus clearer. So you can see how the horse constellation roughly corresponds with the Alder tree and the days of the Alder tree going from Aquarius into Pisces. Now you'll also see, I'm going to turn it upside down so it looks more like a horse. So on the left, there's the head of the horse and its two front legs. And then the body of the horse is like a large square, a large rectangle. And the two hind legs project backwards. So it's like it's leaping over the Milky Way. So the pale blue streak is the Milky Way. So Pegasus is often depicted like this. It's often depicted as half a horse, with the idea that it's rising out of the ocean. So the second half of it is underwater. You can't see it. So it's kind of coming out of the ocean is the idea. This part of the night sky corresponds with Aquarius pouring all its water continually, and Pisces the fish. So it's seen as a wet or watery part of the night sky. So the horse is coming out of the water. Now, here's a thing then. Just checking that out. So as well as the horse, kind of near its back legs, you can see the breast shape of Cassiopeia. So loosely speaking, the horse and the goddess with profound boobies are kind of together in the night sky at this time of the year. Now, another thing with these presentations is I wanted to bring a treasure from the ancient world that we can look at to understand more about Celtic mythology. And the treasure for today is hundreds of millions of artifacts, which I can't possibly show you. I'm going to show you some of them. And the treasure for today, or for this session, is Celtic money, Celtic coins. And there are hundreds and hundreds of them in museums and collections and stuff. So, but bearing in mind the horse and the goddess with breasts, emphasizing on the breasts. So almost most Celtic coins have horses on them. The Celts were obsessed with horses. There's usually a face on the other side and a horse on. Horse would be tails, wouldn't it? I suppose. There are other examples of other imagery, but by far the most common is horses. And so what does that represent? That's something to explore. But if you look carefully at these two, the one on the left, by her shoulder, there's a constellation. Okay, those dots joined together by lines are constellations. And in front of the horse's chest, there's a triangular constellation. And below the horse's belly, there's a triskelion. Quite interesting. And that's repeated on the coin on the right. They've got a triangle constellation in front of the horse's breast, a kind of square one under its front legs, and there's a little triskelion below its body. Look at these two. Quite commonly, it's a female riding these horses. If it's not a horse on its own, it's usually a female rider. And you can see how pronounced their breasts are. It's quite clear. It's not ambiguous. They couldn't be male riders. They are female riders. The one on the left has 2 stars above her head, kind of implying simplistically she's riding through the starry night sky. No, and both of them, well, the one on the left seems to be holding a shield and some sort of weapon, I don't know, and the one on the right might be holding a bow and arrow. I say that because it's a recurring motif on other Celtic artwork. So here's the thing, and I'm brand new to this. There are hundreds of thousands of Celtic coins to examine, and I haven't done it. But there's enough evidence here to say, look at those coins. What's waiting to be discovered? You know, what constellations are being repeatedly discovered, waiting to be discovered. Very interesting. So these are leads for the future. You know, there's a lot to learn from the symbolism the Celts chose to put on their coins. And the main thing then seems to be a female figure and a horse. And that's a recurring pattern. Go back to the asterism of now, predominantly Aquarius, the queen of the gods, and Pegasus, the celestial horse, are there corresponding with Imbolc, corresponding with Brigid and Brigantia, and so on. So most commonly, There are inscriptions of her name, of course, but the Celtic goddess related to horses, as far as archaeology goes, is Epona. And she's the only Celtic deity to have been honored with an inscription in Rome itself. You know, so she found her way into respectable acknowledgement by Roman citizens and stuff. And there are loads of statues and carvings of Epona, always depicted as a matriarchal figure, usually flanked by horses. If she isn't riding a horse herself, she's usually sitting there and there's horses either side of her. That's quite a common motif. This one here has fire braziers on the left and right. So she's there as a kind of horse goddess with fire as well, which is very much of Imbolc and Bridie. So here's a thing then, just maybe looking at my notes. So there is a ton of archaeological evidence for Epona. There isn't a single story about her. You know, and this is a recurring thing that we're going to find again and again. So archaeology gives us information of certain Celtic gods and goddesses, but the medieval writers or the Roman writers wrote no stories at all. So all we know about them, all we can learn about them is to figure out their iconography and their symbols, you know, relate them to stars or times of the year or agricultural thoughts, you know, and then modern day visionary work to see what ideas can be perceived by intuitive people of the modern day. But there is that huge gap that there is Epona, she's everywhere, but not a single story. And when we look at some of the stories, we're going to have gods, goddesses that have not a single bit of archaeological evidence. This is a dilemma for Celtic researchers. So here's an amazing thing we've looked at before. It's just so busy. And the whole bottom bit is star lore of Leo the lion and Hydra the water serpent and Crater the wine mixing cup and a hen for Corvus the crow and so on. But in the middle, there's Epona flanked with horses. So she is there as part of a much more complicated iconography. I would argue that she's a portrayal of the queen of the heavens, and you know, the main asterisms are the horse and her breasts, you know, and that's being emphasized as a mother upon a horse, you know. And then when we get to the Celtic stories, there's the importance of the mare, the great mare. Epona is meant to mean something like the great mare or the mother of horses. So these are vessels from Thrace. Thrace is Bulgaria, Eastern Europe, but it's still Celtic lands. And it's reckoned to be the silver work of the Gunderstrup cauldron best correlates with Thracian silver work. So most scholars kind of think that even though the Gunderstrup cauldron was found in Sweden, it's Thracian metalwork, really, and that it was treasure hoard taken to Sweden at some point in time. But here's a thing, here's a recurring figure on the Thracian Celtic vessels is this golden clothed lady riding a horse. So you could say it's Epona. In the east of Europe, there are Thracian goddesses known by name. The two that correspond with this horse goddess are Kotys and Bendis. And because she's usually holding a bow and arrow, most scholars equate her with Artemis or Diana, but that's simply because of the bow and arrow. It doesn't go any deeper than that. We don't really know if the Celts saw her as a moon goddess like Diana or Artemis. She's just holding a bow and arrow. But the interesting thing is that coming then to medieval stories, in the Mabinogion, the first story tells of Rhiannon and her first appearance at a kind of enchanted hill. She is riding a white horse and she is dressed in gold and silk. So again, this is so perfect, just like the Gundestrup Cauldron corresponding with stories in the Mabinogion. This golden dressed female queen figure on a white horse is depicted here. Really, it's a silver horse and a golden dress, but for all intensive purposes, it's a lovely representation of the medieval writings about Rhiannon. So Rhiannon's story, and I'm going to touch on things that I find a bit upsetting and disturbing, but that it has to be evaluated. And it's not just that archaeology and medieval stories don't tell the same, that they don't sing from the same songbook. The medieval stories are written by patriarchal Christianity, and that can't be done away with. So the stark contrast is all of the depictions of Epona or Kotys and Bendis, they are a woman empowered. She's like Ishtar riding into battle or something. This is a totally strong warrior woman or a very empowered matriarchal mother figure surrounded by horses. It's complete power and empowerment. But when we get to the medieval stories of the goddesses that are related to horses, they're humiliated. They're humiliated in many different ways. So Rhiannon, without going into it too deeply, she marries a king called Pwyll, and they have a son, but her son is kidnapped on the night that she gave birth. And there were 6 handmaidens who were asleep and they didn't catch the kidnapper. So they had to come up with an excuse, an alibi of how they neglected to stop the newborn babe being stolen. So they kill a puppy and they smear its blood all over Rhiannon while she's asleep. And when she wakes up, they tell her that in the night she went mad and killed her own child. So she's accused of infanticide, killing her baby, and her punishment is to be at the horse block of her kingdom or castle and tell her shameful story to all who come to the castle, and offer to give them a ride on her back as if she was a horse. It's a weird story, and it's a happy ending. Her son is discovered and returned to her and so on. But there's this humiliation of the queen, and all of her motifs are the horse. She appears on a horse, and her son is found in eastern Wales by a horse lord who raises horses and stuff. It's an ongoing theme, but the humiliation of the horse queen now brings us to Ireland. So there was this chap called Gerald of Wales. He was active round about the late 1100s. He was a cleric for Henry II. And he wrote a lot of stuff which people consider to be history. But He's a nasty propagandist, really. In the 1180s, he went around Ireland and he wrote lots of things down about Irish culture. And traveling with him as a teenager was a young lad who would one day become King John, Richard the Lionheart's brother. But anyway, Gerald of Wales took the teenage Prince John around Ireland, and he ended up writing a book about their travels. Now, his writing is blatant. He really had a very, very low opinion of the Irish, really debased. Here's some of the things that he said. His book was called Topographica Hibernica, the topography of Ireland. And he described the Irish as rude people living like beasts, given to treachery more than any other nation, frightfully ugly, adulterous and incestuous, and fully corrupted by perverse habits. So what he writes about Ireland is not going to be without propaganda or as bias. You know, these are Norman French overlords looking down upon a Celtic culture. Equally, they're patriarchal Christians sneering at anything that would be pre-Christian. So, bearing in mind that's his attitude towards the Irish people, he gives a written account of a king in Northern Ireland and of a ceremony of becoming a king that involves a mare, the symbol of the horse goddess, the symbol of sovereignty, if you like. So just as any groom marrying a bride, you know, the groom looks after the white horse. Yeah, so this is his very debased description, almost taking the mickey out of the stupidity and base nature of the Irish sovereignty ceremony, which would have been the king marrying the goddess of the land, and her main symbol is the white horse. That would be the basic motif. And this is how Gerald of Wales twists it all around. The whole people are gathered in one place. A white mare is led into the midst of them. He who is to be inaugurated, that is the one who's going to become king, comes before the people on all fours, like he's crawling around on all fours. No nobility there. The mare being immediately killed and cut in pieces and boiled. A bath is prepared for the king from the broth. Sitting in the bath, he eats of the flesh which is brought to him, the people partaking of it also. He is also required to drink of the broth in which he is bathing. So they've made a soup out of this horse, and the would-be king is in this bath of horse broth, and which is bathed, and he has to drink of this broth as he's in the bath with it, and he's not to draw it with any vessel like a cup or a bowl, but lap at it with his mouth. So this noble king is in a bath of horse blood and broth, lapping at it like some retarded, ugly, base thing. And then Gerald of Wales concludes with, these unrighteous rites being duly accomplished, his royal authority and dominion are ratified. So this is a Christian cleric taking a future king of England around Ireland and describing Irish coronation ceremony as this barbaric, base slaughtering of a horse and stuff. Makes me angry. But it's a recurring thing in the Welsh story of Bran and Branwen. Branwen is a queen. She's going to be Queen of Ireland. She's a noble princess, and her dowry to the King of Ireland and his men is a load of horses. Now, she has a very twisted uncle, and when he finds out that she's marrying the King of Ireland without him being asked, he takes his anger out on the horses, the symbols of sovereignty, the symbols of the Queen of sovereignty, and he mutilates them horribly. He cuts their mouths and their eyes and their ears and so on. So it's this, again, it's this nasty attack upon the symbol of the Queen of sovereignty. Bran, when he finds out, he tries to make amends with the King of Ireland. He offers him more horses and he gives him the magical cauldron, and a kind of peace is made. And Branwen goes to Ireland to be Queen of Ireland. And she and the King of Ireland have a son. And the son is called Gwern, which is Welsh for alder tree, you know. But the Irish nobles are still offended by the humiliation, the brutality, butchery of the horses. And they get the King of Ireland to take it out on Branwen. So she's kept as a prisoner in the kitchens and slapped every day by the cook and so on. And there's a medieval story. Eventually she escapes by a little bird in her hand, which is what's depicted on the Gunderstrup cauldron with the three birds, you know. So that story's familiar enough, but it was just an example of the symbol of the Queen being the horses and the horses being mutilated. Before I finish, though, we won't finish on that rather miserable nasty stories. There are other stories in Ireland. There is a wonderful story of a fairy maiden from the other world. Her name is Niamh of the golden hair. And she offers herself in love to Oisin, the great poet. But when she appears from the sea riding a white horse, and she has this golden hair. So it's the same symbols then of the white horse and the gold, just like Rhiannon on a white horse with her gold dress. Oisin happily falls in love with her and goes to the land of eternal youth for 300 years in that story. But looking now just briefly to the last few days of the days of Alder, which are the first 3 degrees of Pisces, and Pisces corresponded with Neptune and Poseidon. So in Celtic lore, that is Manannán mac Lir, the god of the sea. And in the Bran and Branwen story, Bran and Branwen are the son and daughter of Lir, the god of the sea. So Branwen is a Venus figure born of the god of the sea. And that's an interesting thing with Niamh coming out of the sea on a white horse, and the constellation of Pegasus. You can only see half of him because he's coming out of the ocean, sort of thing. It's a recurring thing. We're going to look at Pegasus a bit more with the days of Willow, because the back legs of Pegasus kick against the Milky Way. And in the story of the 9 muses, the 9 maidens, there is a river that comes from Mount Helluson, which is the abode of the 9 maidens. And this river is the source of all poetic inspiration. And it appeared, it sprang out of the rocks as a stream by Pegasus kicking the rocks with its back legs. So there's a direct connection between Pegasus, the Milky Way, the river that inspires all poets, and Bridie, Bridget, is the goddess of poetry, and the 9 muses and 9 maidens inspire the poets. It's all there with the horse lore of Pegasus, along with Bran and Branwen being the children of the god Lear. There's also the Irish story of the swans, the children of Lear. So we'll look at that too with the Days of Willow. So anyway, plenty there to think about with the horse goddess and Pegasus. I'll stop sharing, but I'll keep recording. You can put your microphones on.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot there, isn't there? There's too much.
Oh, it's lovely,
Yeah.
so lovely.
Yes.
And how the horse and Pegasus and the sky and the water all come together. It's just so lovely. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so
That
much.
was very nice.
I've
Extraordinary.
already said in previous sessions that archaeology tells one story and then the medieval stories are written by Christian scribes. But
So
what really hit me getting ready for this session was just how empowered and high up and exalted Epona is always depicted. And then in medieval stories, the queen, there's always a humiliation and abuse of horses and so on. It's a stark contrast.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about Pegasus kicking the rocks and the water coming, because when I do the Kingston Zodiac in Virgo, one of the places we go to is Carshalton. And in Carshalton, there is an Anne Boleyn well there. And I always think of Anne Boleyn as being very much abused and misunderstood. So it's the same sort of theme. And it's said that when she came through there in Carshalton, her horse kicked a stone and the spring of the Wandle River began. And the Wandle, it follows on. I just love it.
Yeah.
All these, and whether it's from the heavens or the earth or Celtic or Roman or however it comes in, they all intertwine and they all tell us the same. So the persecuted female.
Yes.
So,
But
and
it's
it
by the
happened.
Christian patriarchy.
Yeah.
No, it was in before that as well.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the same guy, Gerald of Wales, he's responsible for King Arthur's grave at Glastonbury, which on the surface, I mean, he's the first writer to tell the story. And on the surface, it's a nice story, but actually it denied King Arthur returning from Avalon, the once and future king. He can't return from Avalon. He's here buried. So there is no Avalon. And also it said, here's Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. So the Isle of Avalon became a physical world location, not a fairy otherworld. You know, it's strange, but in the 12th century, you could be burnt for being heretical, like the Cathars in the south of France. And to that hardcore kind of Catholicism of the 12th century, there was only one person that had died and would return, and that's Jesus. You know, so who is this King Arthur living in Avalon who's going to return one day? That just doesn't fit well with hardcore medieval Catholicism, you know. And who's the Lady Morgan looking after him in the other world? So it's the writings of Gerald of Wales that suppresses all that and the monks of Glastonbury Abbey say, no, it's a physical king, and there's no mythical other world, and there's not going to be a second coming of King Arthur and all that sort of stuff. So this is the same man writing about would-be Irish kings, instead of marrying a mare goddess, being involved in some horrible butchery and lapping at the blood juice in a bath without even a cup. You know, it takes the nobility away from Irish sovereignty rights.
You know, with the horse goddess being so much venerated, and like you think about the quality of horses and how sensitive they are.
Yeah,
Like, you can hear a heartbeat from a few meters away, and when you spend time with them, you just see how gentle and soft they are. This, like what you were saying, it was very sad, the way that horse goddess has been denigrated in the stories and shamed. And yeah, there was a story that was read to me not long ago. I've said that I've been trying to remember the book, but I can't remember the book. But basically, it's about a man who has like a kind of homestead in Ireland, and he loves horses and he worships the horse goddess. But one day she comes to him in like as a woman, but he doesn't accept that it can really be her, even though he knows in his heart it is. And then she leaves him. It's quite a interesting idea. The goddess coming back but not being received because, you know, it's too real. Maybe.
yeah.
Don't know.
As a asterism, then the kind of stars along the Milky Way, you've got the horse and the breasts of the mother goddess, and then you've got the three birds as well. You know, the three birds of Rhiannon are there, along with the horse and the feminine symbol of breast. And that was on the coins, to my mind. You had the horse and the proud-breasted female, and under the horse, the triskelion. I'm kind of wondering, is that the summer triangle? Is that the three birds as well? It's the same motifs, if you like.
That occurred to me too.
Yeah. It's just
Those coins are something
pondering.
else.
Yeah.
What dawns on me is when the ocean rolls and it's really rolling in, and these waves are curling, they curl like the heads of horses, and that's often the metaphor that we hear of the rolling ocean as horses of great sea severed about my own land. And I would suspect perhaps the bow and arrow in the hand of the goddess on the horse is the light of the moon shining into the cairn on certain days of the year, like when the sun penetrates into Newgrange on the winter solstice. She may be the boon goddess whose beam of light strikes deep into the earth at certain moments in the course of the year. I'm familiar with Epona as the Roman goddess of apples, the apple goddess. So maybe there's something there about, you know, the apple and sex and this whole idea of the corruption of sacred sexual union with the Roman Church that went on. And yeah.
Back to Gerald of Wales then, and the sovereignty debasing. It is meant to be a alchemical marriage between the king and the goddess of the land, but of course the church can't tolerate a divine feminine, so it has to be debased in some way. Franklin, it was you, when we were doing volume 3 of the Grove, that made the observation that Branwen was a Venus, a daughter of the god of the sea. And I hadn't really joined those dots before. And then I was really excited just recently when I realized that the Pisces is Poseidon, Neptune, Manannan, you know, so that's perfect for Branwen being daughter of the god of the sea. It's there in the same portion of the sky. And it's there in the days of Alder.
There's another story. Another story that comes to mind that's given by Robin Williamson is Freke and Finur, and it's, you know, Finur's parents conspired to murder Freke, and he's a great swimmer, and they convince him to swim in this deepest, darkest pool in the land. Certainly there's nothing dangerous about it, but it turns out there's a dragon that lives in there, and the dragon comes up and nobody will throw him a sword. Finur throws off her clothes and dives into the water with a sword, and Freke manages to kill it. And then they come out of the water and he just falls down just about dead, and they wash him in boiled horse meat, which is what they do for nobles. So a similar story there. He's washed in boiled horse meat, and then they lay him on a bed about to die. And then his people come from the other world and they take him into the other world. And the next day he returns with the full vigor of life, and they give him a great feast. And anyways, it's clearly a story that's very relevant to this transition, I think, from Aquarius to Pisces.
Here's another thing in passing, Franklin. I meant to share it with you and Alan Oughton, but I've just been busy. The main square of Pegasus, the constellation, the body bit, is called the Square of Pegasus.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a square with a bright golden apple on each corner. Which
Oh.
so it's the Gwen that Gwythbwyll is played upon, you know, and so then you can go back to Ellen as a sovereignty goddess, and her father is making this magical chess set, but all of her main symbolism is this gold, just like Rhiannon in a golden dress and so on.
Yeah, and the square is the symbol of the earth.
Yeah.
And my only horse essence is white horses. And it's
White Horse of Buffington.
Yeah, it's the white horses. I'll share it with you, Ewan. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Killick wears a cloak with 4 golden apples on each corner when he goes and rides to Arthur's court.
That's right. And when Arthur plays Owain in the Dream of Rhonabwy, they put the Gwen down, which is a blanket thing with a gold apple on each corner, and then they put the game of Gwythbwyll on the white mantle. So
it's got to be relevant that Andromeda comes off the corner of Pegasus, and in the Roman story she's the daughter of Cassiopeia and Cepheus, who are 2 circumpolar stars in that neighborhood. So you have this beautiful goddess with right attached to the horse, perhaps riding the horse out of the sea, and it's not hard to conflate that with the beautiful Andromeda attached to the horse.
Yeah.
I wanted to say something about the back to the broth. It's kind of mundane compared to where you got your head in the stars, but really broth of animals, if the animal was raised in a fashion that is really the way I wish we could, in the ancient style of having the horse be treated like royalty through its life and given love and cared for, and having this incredible experience of the nature's pastures of the land of that area, and the goddess of the land being imbued in this horse, and then the ceremony, which the tellers of the tale forgot to tell us what kind of ceremonial aspects were given, and what were the opportunities of the priestesses of the ceremony to further imbue that animal, and then to be immersed in the in the broth, you know, we take broth when we're sick. And broth is known to have incredible nutritional value and healing value. So I just want to put that in. You know, it's kind of strange to immerse yourself in the broth, for example, but Cleopatra took baths in milk, which is expressed from an animal. So just putting that in our heads a little too, and a possible positive look at the physical nature of the act itself.
Part of me was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I was thinking, well, you know, in a shamanic ancient world, you might eat of an animal to partake of its energy and its power and all of that. And so consuming the goddess as a horse is like the Catholic Mass. It's kind of being one with the goddess, if you like. There are those kind of ideas. But looking at Gerald of Wales' attitude to the Irish and his enjoyment of saying, you know, the king was in the bath and just drinking it with his mouth rather than using a cup, and describing it as an unrighteous rites. To me, it's suggestive of Gerald of Wales belittling Irish culture rather than honoring.
He was a nasty man.
Yeah.
and
but equally, he could have heard some old sovereignty practices and then exaggerated them or something as well.
And I get the sense that he's part of the mission to create a tourist industry among the up and coming cathedrals that are going up at that time. And so you know, you don't want your tourists going to Ireland. You want them on the island of Britain, where they give their money to the British cathedrals that are coming.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, you've got people writing about Guinevere, and in a lot of the stories, she's slapped across the face, and that has to be that wrong has to be righted. And of course, she ends up committing adultery and running off to a nunnery. You know, but she was originally a Welsh sovereignty goddess. So these medieval writers, if they're not debasing things, they're Christianizing the divine feminine and turning them into nuns or things. You know, they have to control the feminine in some way.
Which is a bizarre thought that they need that control.
You know, you can think of the ox as a beast of burden on the farms, and a horse as well would be able to work the farm. But the difference with the horse is the horse can take you far quickly. So if you're a woman trying to get away from a bastard, you have a horse, you have a great advantage. You're going to beat him, right? So you know, they don't want to lose the chattel, but a horse can make a clean escape. True. Not a cow. You can't ride a cow for safety.
There's a really fascinating description in the story of Rhiannon when she's first seen. They're at an enchanted hill waiting for some sort of magical event to occur, and they don't know what it will be. And she appears on a white horse and in a golden dress, and it describes this kind of strange paranormal nature of it, that she is just ambling slowly on her white horse, and the king sends one of his men to go and see her, and he can't catch up with her. He's galloping and galloping and galloping, and she's ambling slowly, and he can't catch up with her. And that's repeated the following day. And then on the third day, the king himself says, oh, this is silly, he's going to try and catch her. And so she appears, and she's trotting along slowly, and he gallops as fast as he can towards her, and she keeps trotting along slowly, and he can't reach her. And then in the end, he just says, look, please, will you just stop and let me talk to you? And she basically says, you could have said that right at the beginning. But if you think about, if she is the goddess on a heavenly horse, it's not reachable anyway, but it's there as a kind of visionary thing to try and make that connection. It's a very interesting, surreal story.
When you're driving in a car and you see the trees flying past you, but the moon just seems to be, you know, like just you just can't quite reach it. The moon is there, but you know, the trees are flying past you. You can't reach the moon.
Something else is like the thing of, you know,
Yes.
the connection to the stars. You know, like Pegasus is such a big sign, takes up so much of the sky, and so do a lot of the other older asterisms as opposed to the zodiac. And it's almost like yeah, you can't see the stars for that. What I'm trying to get to is like they're so much more prominent, yet they're ignored by most people when they're focusing in astrology on the zodiac.
Let's stop there. We've got to do our meditation, so I'll stop recording. And I brought my drum this time to call back.
Great.
I'll just press.